Hello, welcome to the Future Minority Dentist Club on ClubHouse. My name is Paula Benefo. I'm a rising D1 at University of California, San Francisco, and today's discussion is about personal statements, tips, and tricks. Um, I am going to have Dr. Marianne and student Dr. Ashley introduce themselves, and we're going to start this discussion. I hope this is a really insightful discussion for everyone who is trying to write their personal statements for this upcoming cycle and future cycles. Here are the best advice that you will get from a practicing dentist and a current dental student.
I originally come from Atlanta, Georgia, and prior to doing dentistry, I was a respiratory therapist.
Um, Nice to meet you, Ashley. This is really exciting. My name is Marianne Demergy. I'm local to California. I went to Loma Linda Dental School for my dental training, and then I went to UCSF for ortho. I finished dental school in 2016 and then ortho in 2019, and I practice now in Southern California. So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay, awesome. Thank you both for being here to answer our questions tonight. So I'll go ahead and start with the first question. Let's see. How honest should we be in our personal statement?
I guess I can go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I would just say that you want to keep it honest, you want to keep it genuine, but you don't want to tell your entire life story. I think that your primary focus in your personal statement should be to reveal to the admissions committee why they should pick you over a bunch of other qualified candidates. So while you want to be honest, you want to make sure that you're tailoring your statement specifically towards dentistry, any influences that you've had that have brought you there, any experiences that you've had that have brought you to that point. But you don't want to go on a tangent about other things, but you do want to be honest and genuine about why you're saying you want to be a dentist, what your plans are. You want that to be genuine.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think kind of like sticking to the topic, exactly like you said, Ashley, catering it to the goal of you're there for applying for dental school. And I know everyone has had different trials and experiences in their life that I think we feel makes us the appropriate candidate to be compassionate and caring doctors. But you want to kind of share what is appropriate and in the manner that is appropriate, that comes across in a way to the reader that you are professional, that you are composed, and that your main goal is to show them exactly like how you said why you are more qualified than the hundreds and thousands of other applicants that are applying that are also qualified. So being, yeah, exactly like you said, being genuine and honest, but also you don't have to unleash the entire story. The point that is kind of relevant to what makes you the appropriate candidate for dental school, I think, is kind of the balance that you want to strike.
Okay, and the next question is kind of related to that. Someone asked, what is considered oversharing? And I'll kind of combine that with another question, and it's, should you address your academic weaknesses?
I think I think if there is a very like poignant explanation that you have, like I know for example, some people may have had an accident or something, or some family issue that made them like could explain, for example, why for one quarter your grades are low. I I don't know if I would make that the focus, unless obviously it was something so dramatic. I don't know if you want to make that the entire focus of the personal statement. But certainly, what I would tie it to is some explanation of perhaps why it happened. And then, more importantly, I think what they would look for is how you grew from it. Like, everyone obviously makes mistakes and things happen in life. That's understandable. But kind of how you grew and how you can better improve, and how it made you much more of a let's say, experienced candidate going into dental school. I also think in terms of applying through the actual application at SAS, they have like a portion that says like something you would like to tell us that is not on your application. And I knew quite a few like advisors said like if you have a blip in your grades or there's something, like you can use that portion to explain it if you have something more compelling to describe in your personal statement.
I would definitely agree with what Marianne was saying. I just want to add, as far as oversharing, one of the biggest things that I would say is just make sure whatever story you're trying to portray to the admissions committee, definitely don't present yourself in a negative light. I've heard that there have been a lot of stories where people down themselves in their own application and it doesn't go so well with the admissions committee. So I would say if you have something, now I know for myself personally, as Marianne was saying, you have a portion on the assets where you can put in that something happened academically or whatnot. And I had that experience myself personally. Prior to my entire matriculation, I played basketball at the collegiate level. I tore my ACL. I went through a whole trial of things. So to say that you can't put things that have happened prior to that brought you here, you can, but you just have to find a way to turn them into a positive. So for me, it was, yeah, my grades were bad, but then I got into my respiratory program. They gave me a chance. I turned my grades around. I proved myself. So in any story that you're going to tell, just make sure that if it's portraying you in a bad light, in some way you have a way to turn that story around and it becomes a success.
Okay, and the next question is, how many experiences should I include in my personal statement?
I think you said experiences. I think this issue is kind of limited with the word count, which I'm not sure if I recall, but I think it depends about it depends on the experiences you've had. So for me going in, I was like straight from high school, college into dental school, and my college experience was in only 3 years. So I definitely felt like I was a naive applicant and I didn't have this like compelling story to share. So for me, I had kind of multiple little stories I felt like that I would try to introduce. Like I did volunteer work, I shadowed at a lot of offices, I want to do teaching one day and I want to go into research. These kind of little like minor stories that kind of compose the entire personal statement was the track that I chose because that was, I think, the candidate that I was going in. But if you are a candidate that has like much, and I would say mine was maybe along the lines of a traditional personal statement, but if you have a compelling story that you feel necessitates having that much more to be written about. So you could allocate, let's say, one or two big experiences that you can write about and explain how they tie into you wanting to go into dental school. I think it depends on the type of candidate that you are and your breadth of experiences that you've had.
Yeah, I would have to say that I agree with Marianne in that I myself was a non-traditional student. So I had a little bit more of an experience, well, more experiences, but in all, I would just say whatever you're going to put on your application, just make sure that it all ties back to the one main focal point of why you chose dentistry and what you plan to do as a dentist.
Okay, I would also like to add to that, as far as including experiences. When I was writing mine, I kind of felt like I was trying to take all of the experiences from my resume or that I listed on my application and kind of tie them all into my personal statement. And when I had people revise it, they were kind of like, these are things that the admissions committee is going to see when you list out your experiences. So you should bring something new to your personal statement. Talk about something that's not necessarily in your experiences section of the application. You can include a few of them or the most important ones, but you shouldn't like rewrite your resume in your personal statement. So the next question is, should we use a linear format, which is like writing from birth to today when writing our personal statement?
I would say no. You definitely want to put only the most relevant experience. I definitely wouldn't start unless it's going to tie into your story that you're trying to tell with your personal statement. I wouldn't go into my childhood and talk about this friend or that friend unless specifically it's going to tie into dentistry. Because again, if you're in a pool full of applicants, they want to get to the bottom of why you want to apply to their school, not my childhood friend, this experience, this, and this. You got to be specific because you only get X amount of characters, so you have to really show who you are in that small amount of character limit that you have.
Yes, I totally agree. I think I had in my case, I had like a bit of imposter syndrome, and you have this desire to want to like fill your personal statement with all these like, I did this and I met this person and I did that person, just to like bulk it up. But I think kind of being very succinct in one experience and then extrapolating upon that is certainly looks much more credible, I would say, because imagine, and something that I can say in hindsight now, having been through it versus when I was in it writing it, you want to imagine like who is reading this personal statement. It's not a peer, it's not a friend of yours or a loved one that like understands you and where you come from. It is like, it is going to be a dentist and an admissions committee, like at the end of the day, probably reading your personal statement. So they want to be compelled. They want to read something interesting. They've read millions of these applications. So it is very easy to kind of perceive someone who is genuine in their writing and someone who is kind of sticking to the point of making sure that they convey why they wanted to do dentistry. So you don't have to do I was born here and then this happened and that happened. It's much more of a compelling read if you write something that is much more thoughtful, much more cohesive, and has a story element to it.
Okay, and the next question is, how do we talk about our shadowing experience if we feel it wasn't great?
I'll let you go ahead, Ashley. I feel like I took a few at the beginning.
So I haven't personally had this experience, but I will just say, even if your shadowing experience was bad, you still want to talk about the things that you actually got to see. Every dentist isn't going to be, to your liking. You guys aren't going to have the same personalities, or whatever the case may be. Your shadowing experience, as you said, may be bad, but still, your primary goal is to see procedures so that you are familiar with them. So that when they come around again, it's like, okay, well, I've seen this before. But also it just lets the admissions committee know, okay, well, you're committed to doing this because you've taken your personal time out, your busy time out to actually see these procedures and familiarize yourself with the procedures. So I definitely wouldn't highlight that I had a bad shadowing experience, but I would definitely talk about, oh, okay, well, I saw crown and bridge preps, I saw, ortho, or I saw endo stuff, versus, oh, I had a bad experience.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe just for this individual to extrapolate upon like what was truly bad about the experience. Like, was it the office style that maybe you realized you didn't like dentistry? It was like you felt like suctioning is very boring, which it can be. Don't worry, that's not dentistry in the real world. So I think important for this person maybe to identify what they felt was truly bad about the experience, and then like Ashley said, don't highlight that it was so terrible, but for yourself, identify what you found about it that wasn't to your liking, and maybe to have it help you realize what you really want. Like for me, when I shadowed dentistry, I was a bit stressed out because in my head I wanted to be an orthodontist. I shadowed ortho, I wanted to do ortho, and then I went to a dental office and freaked out seeing like Ash said, like crown and bridge, endo, and I was like, oh no, I don't know if this is what I want to do. So it can be kind of a useful tool. It is a useful tool. It's certainly what you want to use to identify like what you want to do in the future. So I would say pinpoint that and then see if that's something to your liking. I still certainly wouldn't point out like, I went to a dental office and I realized I didn't want to do dentistry. I want to specialize, because I mean that might come across as kind of not in a good light. But you can highlight, of course, the things that were exciting, like you liked how the dentist interacted with his or her patients, how the patients received the dentist, how the staff works well together. So there's many different things that you can focus on rather than just saying it was a bad experience.
Okay, and the next question is kind of a follow-up. Should we include what characteristics we liked about the dentist that we shadowed?
Yeah, I think in like I mean, certainly to anyone's discretion, they could, it's, no one is saying you can't or can't do anything, but if it were me and I truly admired how the dentist interacted with their patients, I would certainly bring it up kind of in like a non-specific sort of way. So for example, you could say, I admired how the dentist was, you know, respectful towards each and every one of their patients. How they interacted with the staff was something that I one day could see myself being. I think a useful thing would be to bring up that fact that you identified personality traits in the dentist that you yourself could see being or doing. So I think those are just some things that I think it's worth highlighting, because when you go to shadow, you want to see if you can see yourself in that position. And I think it's valuable to point that out, certainly in a personal statement. Doesn't have to be super detailed specifics like the names or whatever, but something that kind of connects those 2 points together.
I would have to say that I agree with Marianne. I know for myself personally, it didn't come to me that I wanted to be a dentist until I actually shadowed with a specific dentist, and I was inspired by his work, by his interaction with his patients, how they loved him, how they were so grateful, and so that's where mine came from. So if that's going to be a portion of your personal statement, then great. But that was my own personal experience. But I do agree with what Marianne says. Yeah.
Okay, the next question is, who should revise my personal statement? And do you think that we should pay for professional editors?
Actually, I would say that I would recommend either if you have a mentor or even the dentist that you're shadowing, or any of your college professors, specifically ones that you may ask to write your recommendation letters. And I just say that because, especially with your college professors, because when you have them read your personal statement and you're asking them to write your recommendation letter, it actually gives them a feel for the reasons why you want to go into dentistry. But also it gives them a chance to get to know you more on a personal level outside of you just being their student. So, I mean, would I say you can get a professional to read it? Of course. I mean, that's a great idea, but if you are in one of those situations where you're budgeting money and it's going to cost a lot of money to do so, reach out to your mentor, see if the dentist that you shadowed will do it for you, or as I said, your college professor.
Yes, totally agree. I really like the idea of actually of asking like college professors, and specifically if you can, like English literature. I feel like having a lit professor or someone that it's not just necessarily the content of what you're writing is important, it's how it is written and how compelling that can be in terms of someone reading it. I think kind of establishing it as a story rather than just like how I think the previous question was saying, like a linear explanation of how you got to where you are, can be certainly compelling. Definitely mentors. I had my dad is an orthodontist, so I had him read it as well, just because he has that experience. But if you have friends that you trust. And even in my case, like I've had people reach out to me on Instagram asking like if I could read their statement, which was incredibly flattering. And like, I think that's certainly something that's worth asking. Not everyone is going to say yes, but if you find someone that you really respect and admire and someone that's in your chosen profession, it certainly doesn't hurt. And I know there's people on Instagram that like I think do like a couple free that they just want to mentor people, and they would certainly be willing to read it. So I think there's definitely options before going down the paid route, because I feel like not all, but there are some that are preying on like that anxiety that we all share and feel about wanting to write the best personal statement. There's definitely, I think, options before you have to go down that road, and if you choose to, that's certainly fine, obviously, as well. But don't feel that there aren't people that aren't going to look out for you and give you honest, thoughtful feedback as well for free.
Okay, perfect. The next question is asking for tips for brainstorming ideas and creating an outline.
I think, again, in hindsight, now that I'm, not that I did this when I wrote mine, but in terms of looking back on my experience, like, I think what certainly helps is like taking an honest assessment of who you are as a person and the kind of provider, dentist, whatever that you want to be, and what image you want to convey to these dentists that are going to be on the admissions committee. So I think kind of having the idea of the professional that you want to be and what it took you to get to this point thus far. And like we said earlier, like those either one or two big experiences that shaped you into who you are today and made you fall in love with dentistry, or those mini little experiences throughout your college or whatever education that led you up to this point, or real life experiences that drew you to here, I think is kind of the foundation for it. And then in my case, it was, especially for my orthodontics application, it was like waiting for that inspirational moment that you just write everything out and then workshopping it from there. So everyone is a different style of writer. You just have to kind of know who you are and then see what moment is going to hit and what kind of writing will come from you.
Yeah, so I agree with what Marianne said. I would say for myself personally, when I was applying to school, when it was time to actually sit down and write my personal statement, as far as an outline, I pretty much just like wrote keywords down and experiences that I had. And as she said, tailor your personal statement to who you want to be as a dentist, what you want to represent. So from my past experiences, from the academics to my prior career, all those things I wrote out and just really honed in on trying to make that into a physical story. So the outline really does help. Writing down keywords, writing down your past experiences, what you want to be, what you want to represent, and then putting it all into one definitely helps to write like a really good personal statement. And actually, I was going to say, somehow I was able to find my personal statement. So if anybody wants to read it or, like get some ideas, I can definitely send it over. I don't mind doing so. Just let me know.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. For the people in the audience, if you do want to read her personal statement, you can go ahead and follow her. I think her Instagram is connected to her page. So go ahead and follow her and feel free to connect with her and ask her to read her personal statement. So the next question is tips. Do you have any tips for someone who is stuck when writing their personal statement?
I think, again, like I think the most important thing, at least again in my head, my focus when I was applying to or writing my personal statement was, this is dentistry and this is a dental oriented thing and this is all about dentistry. And like, again, when I look back on it, I think it is obviously dentistry, but there's also this literary component to it that you want to focus on to know what makes something well written versus something that's average written and something that is generally poorly written. So Like I said, for me, I kind of had a hit of inspiration when I realized, like, wow, I am going to be an orthodontist and I can't believe it. And I've finally reached like all this thing. So I had that kind of stroke of inspiration. And I remember like I just wrote everything out like word vomit, and then obviously workshopped it because it was not really great when I first wrote it. But that idea kind of struck. So if you, I think some tips would be like start early, because I anticipate, which is what happened with me, is like you sit there staring at that Word doc and the little thing is blinking at you and you're like, I have no idea what to write. So I think Ashley's tips, I really like that about like the key words, kind of putting those just on the paper and you kind of formulating sentences from there, could kind of overcome like writer's block, because essentially you're just writing a piece of literature, if that's the way you want to look at it. Um, I think getting inspiration from like other personal statements, other things people have written, or a piece of like literature that you admire, just to get the inspiration of the words flowing within you. It doesn't necessarily have to be about specific to dentistry. So getting, I think that inspiration is something that would kind of overcome that writer's block that you're having, and just try to start writing stuff down. Rather than focusing so much on what it is, just let those words come out, and then you can certainly be able to adjust them afterwards.
Yes, I 100% agree. I definitely had writer's block, but for me, it just took to look at someone else's personal statement and kind of see, like, where their storyline was going, how they put it all together. Like I said before, writing out those keywords, writing out those experiences, and also just talking to someone who's been through the experience and how they tailored theirs. That definitely helped me with mine.
Okay, thank you. So those are all of the questions that we had that were asked through Instagram. If anyone in the audience has any questions they would like to ask, feel free to hit the hand on the bottom right, and we'll bring you to the stage so you can ask your question.
We have shy people. It's okay.
Dr. Mitzi, hi.
Yeah, hey. I had a question. So I think, yeah, you guys gave some really good advice, and I remember when I was in dental school, I was like on helping with the admissions committee in my like fourth year or something. I remember reading a lot of personal statements, and like they all kind of start to sound the same after a while. And I think I remember I read one, and it was very unconventional, but it was like very striking. I think the way they presented it wasn't the typical like, oh, I shadowed and I took these classes and I volunteered and I decided I want to be a dentist because I saw like it combines like, science and art. And they did this, I don't remember exactly like how they framed it, but I remember like even to this day, I still remember it, and it's been like many years since I've like read it. And I'm like kind of trying to write my personal statement for ortho, and I'm kind of torn between writing like a very more conventional statement, which I think I probably wrote to get into dental school, versus trying to make it like very unique, and maybe not exactly spending so much of it talking about orthodontics, but like more kind of sharing what kind of person I am, and then kind of at the end tying it into like how that fits into why I would want to be an orthodontist, but kind of more an unconventional approach. But I'm like kind of scared to do that, because it's
That's
like, what if
what's
someone
happening.
reads it and they're like, why the heck are they talking about like something that's completely unrelated, until the end? And what if I like lose them halfway through and they're like, no.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ashley. Go ahead.
So I don't have any ortho experience because I'm a newbie, but I will say what I found interesting about some people's personal statements and even mine was I didn't start it off. Mine kind of started off in a conversation. So, and a couple of my friends that are like in different medical programs as well have used their prior experience to come up with a scenario and actually have a dialogue in their personal statement. So, I guess let's say if there's a specific procedure that you're going to be doing in ortho, you could tie that into your personal statement and then go from there. That's what I did. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I really identify with this one because, especially, I felt like when I was applying like to residency, I was like, I you kind of feel like this. I've done it once. I'm gonna do it the way I want to do it because I'm like, this is it. This is my my strike into like what I want to do. And so, for me, I think I know this is the answer that really sucks, but it depends. I would say it depends on what school you're applying to. And I know this sounds maybe like the pragmatically like terrible advice, but I think if knowing myself, I think the advice that I would want to hear is it all depends on like the cohesiveness of your application, because they're not going to focus just on one thing. It's not one thing that will get you through the door. It's the entire application together. So if you have like if you're worried like let's say the reader is not going to take you as seriously, or they're going to be like, where is this coming from? This is so out of left field. But if, for instance, you have like these spectacular like CV of like grades, awards, things you've done to like back it up, I think they are less likely to kind of dismiss you and take you as like a serious candidate that not only has the grades and the experience to back it up, but you also have the confidence to portray yourself in a much more bold manner than like exactly like you said, the more traditional application. In my instance, so I would kind of take a look at your application as like a whole. If you feel like it could stand on its own, I'm a much more safe bet kind of person, so I always try to like hedge and like explain how it still ties back to ortho. You can still be confident and the unconventional, different type of mission statement that stands out, but you also can have those traditional elements that would not be so foreign, let's say, to the person that's reading it. For me, I think it was for my ortho application, I had like the run-of-the-mill kind of application, I would say, for the personal statement. But in that like additional info portion, I wrote like, my dream is to open up a coffee shop, do my orthodontics office next to it, and then one day do like international trade with like coffee beans and stuff. I don't know. And I just submitted my application right after that. And when I applied to UCSF, they all asked me about that. So it worked in my favor. But I was definitely anxious and nervous. But for me, it seemed like a small gamble to take because it was just that little blurb at the bottom that I added in. But yeah, it stood out. So I think it was a small enough gamble, I felt, for me. But I think, like I said, I felt like it wasn't a huge risk for me where I wouldn't be doubting myself when I submitted the application. So you can kind of assess your application as a whole, see what risks you feel comfortable taking, and at the end of the day, like, feel happy with the application you're submitting. Try, like, obviously be yourself when you're submitting it, because then when you go to the interviews and if something struck them as what they liked in the statement, if it's not consistent with the person you present at the interview, then there is some disconnect. So I hope that helps. I wish you so much luck for ortho.
Thank you very much.
Okay. If anyone else in the audience has a question they would like to ask, you can do that now. And otherwise, do the speakers have any last tips or advice for the audience?
I can give like just my like final tips, especially now having like kind of just read a few personal statements. I think like the number one, like I would just say, is the and which I've always, I think, apparently been saying for like the past 40 minutes, is the focus on it as a piece of writing rather than just throwing out like a laundry list of what you did. Like the grammar, the punctuation, like run-on sentences. Like, I know this sounds very like duh, but for me, that reading those, like, I get turned off when I read something that is poorly written. And it's, I imagine it would be the same. Like I said, imagine the person who's reading your statement at like 7 o'clock at night after a day of working on patients or whatever they have to do throughout their day. Like, they want something compelling, quick, easy to read. Every admissions committee person is different. Some read everything verbatim, others maybe skim through it, but you want to present yourself in a professional way. If anything, I would say a professional, cohesive, and very like literarily, what's the word I'm looking for, like cohesive sort of way that they are not going to be turned off by your writing. So I think at the bare minimum, you want to do that, even if you feel like, oh, my story's not as good, my story's not as this, like, you just want to have that so they have that initial trust in you as a candidate, and it all kind of just ties in together.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then I'm going to get ready to close up the room. I just want to let everyone know that our next event will be next Friday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. as well. And the topic will be navigating PWIs as a minority. And also this discussion, as well as all future discussions, will be posted to our YouTube. And you can find that by going to our Instagram page at Future Minority Dentist and clicking in our bio, and you will find a link tree so that you can access our YouTube page. So I hope to see everyone at our next event. Thank you again to the speakers and for everyone that tuned in tonight. I'm going to close the room now, and I hope everyone has a really great weekend.
Thank you.